Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Jonathan Keren-Black. He's a rabbi at the Leo Baeck Centre in East Kew. Thanks for coming in, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Now, I got stuck on something there. Your part of your description as being a progressive rabbi. What's that progressive Judaism? What's the story behind that?
Well, I'm a rabbi, first of all, but the progressive. Okay, so the Jewish world is disparate and diverse, like every religious grouping, and if you want, there are so many different groups. In fact, we say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You know, that's one of the features of Judaism. We never entirely agree on everything, and that leads to a wonderful diversity. Also some challenges and controversies from time to time, and in fact controversies have been so important through Jewish history that when they had an insurmountable difference, they came up with the phrase teku, and that means we'll leave it for the Messiah to decide. So basically, if we try to simplify the Jewish world, I would say we can divide it into 2 parts. And the traditional Jewish perspective has been that God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai. So basically, the Torah is true in every regard, and you're bound by the rules of the Torah and the way it's been interpreted by the rabbis who derived the rules from the Torah.
Yes.
Right. That's called Torah from Sinai. And that's an orthodox belief.
Yep.
We do not believe that. We think that Torah is a human document written by people, our ancestors, seeking to answer the question, what does God require of us? How should we act? How should we be to achieve our full human potential, to make a better society, to be better human beings, to be caring and loving, to emulate God?
Yes.
So we would say all of the best. Obviously, there's a limit to what we actually know about God, but we believe that God is as loving and kind and forgiving and compassionate and just, fair. And so we set God up to all those things, and then we try to emulate God by acting like that. So basically, we think humans wrote the Torah at a long period of time, not at one moment, and it is therefore of its time and context. So when it says, for example, you should stone to death a rebellious son, we simply don't accept that that is consonant with the loving, kind, caring, forgiving God.
Of course,
right?
Yes.
It's also not a good recipe for survival. Many of us have been rebellious from time to time, you know.
Yes.
And when it says you should enter the land and kill all the Canaanites, that doesn't seem to be very just and very caring, especially given that the Torah teaches us that God is the God of all people, not just the Jewish God. You know, it's the same God for all people. And in other places we're reprimanded, for example, for the angels celebrated when the Israelites finally came out of Egypt into freedom, and the Egyptians drowned trying to pursue them through the Sea of Reeds. And the rabbis tell us that God reprimanded the angels and said, "Why are you celebrating? Why are you cheering when my children are drowning?" In other words, God is the God of all people, and certainly not just the Israelite God. So therefore, to say you should kill the Canaanites doesn't make sense. So we don't have an issue because we can say it's of its time, of its context, and it's 4,000 and 3,000 years ago, and it's not applicable to us in every way. So if orthodoxy believes that God gave Torah, and non-orthodoxy believes it's a human document seeking to understand what God wants of us, but of its time, then we've got the orthodox and the non-orthodox. But instead of defining yourself by a negative term, we use a positive term, it's progressive. We think we are progressing in our understanding. We call it actually, the Orthodox say revelation happened at that one moment at Mount Sinai, and the progressive part of the Jewish community believes in progressive revelation, that revelation and trying to understand better God's will continues to this day.
Yes, that's fascinating. It fits in with a concept which I've heard expounded that many scriptures, and in this context, so would be the Torah, is that they're actually unconscious love letters to God, trying to create this love that they seek from their heart. Yes, thank you for that.
That actually, but we have to be careful because that's not only a progressive belief, really, because the rabbis from 2,000 years ago started writing down what they understood God wanted, and they came up with a very clever way of understanding it, which is to say that God didn't only give the written Torah to Moses, but at the same time God also gave an oral tradition.
Okay.
So we actually have two Torahs, the written Torah and the oral Torah.
Okay.
And you can't understand the written Torah without the oral Torah. The question is who owns and interprets the oral Torah. And so it's brilliant. The idea that you can't write down the oral Torah, it should remain oral, means it can adapt and change to different needs and societies, and be applied for its own time and understanding, and moderate, interpret the written Torah. Unfortunately, it got written down. And that is a shame, because it's a brilliant idea when it's not written down. So it was written down as the Mishnah, and that became the Talmud. And so as far as I'm concerned, the Orthodox world is somewhat limited by the fact that it's been written down, and we don't feel bound by the way it's been written down. So a very important rabbi from the last generation called Mordechai Kaplan in America, he said tradition has a vote but not a veto.
Yes.
Very clever words.
It is indeed.
Taking an anagram of vote. So it votes, it's significant. Our tradition, what our tradition says, what our ancestors did in the past is important to us, but it doesn't necessarily determine what we do today.
But something which does determine what we do today is time. We're out of it for the moment. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Jonathan Keren-Black. He's a rabbi at the Leo Baeck Centre in East Kew. And we've just been talking about the way in which the Torah has been interpreted by progressive Judaism. Now, you've also taken on some fairly significant projects with hymn books and prayer books, etc. Tell us about those, because it's a big project as far as I understand. 700 pages?
Yes, first thing I should say is that one of the issues about progressive Judaism is treating men and women and girls and boys equally. We believe that all people are created in the image of God, and irrespective of their sexual orientation or their gender orientation or their age or their colour or their religion, they're all equal in the sight of God. So I'm picking up slightly the hymn books, only as a joke. We've taken out all references to male and female in the prayer books. So we don't talk about all men when we mean all people. We don't say all mankind when we mean all humanity. And similarly, we don't talk about God as masculine. And so we don't use words like Lord and King and Master.
Okay. Right.
Now this is different, of course, to Christianity, because part of a Christian conception of God is male, naturally, with Jesus. perhaps I should just make clear, since I've mentioned Jesus, that Jews have no problem with Jesus, they have a problem with Christ. That clearly Jesus existed as a person, as a charismatic and a leader, and probably he was one of the early generations that became rabbis. No question, of course, that he was steeped in Jewish tradition. He considered himself to be Jewish and was Jewish, working in Israel 2,000 years ago, and what eventually developed into Judeo-Christianity and then Christianity. It took at least 130 years, something like that, before it separated off clearly.
Yes.
So no problem with Jesus, problem with the Christ, because Christ means Messiah.
Yes.
And we have a simple test for the Messiah in Judaism. If the Messiah has come, the world will be perfect, and lions will lie down with lambs,
Yes.
and every person will sit under their vine and fig tree, and no one shall terrorize them. And sadly, if we look at the state of the world today, or over the last 2,000 years, we ain't there yet. So as far as we're concerned, the Messiah hasn't come, and in fact, we've had a variety of false messiahs. To the extent that the rabbis said something very wise, they said, if you're planting a tree, and planting a tree, of course, is a symbol of permanence and continuity. It takes a long time for a tree to grow and give fruit and shade and wood. So they said, if you're planting a tree and they say, the Messiah has come, finish planting the tree, then go and look.
Yes.
So it's a very pragmatic idea that the Messiah is a concept that we're working towards. Time of we talk about the messianic times rather than an individual Messiah. Actually, we talk times of perfection, a time when the world will live in peace, a sort of return to the Garden of Eden where you didn't have to worry about toiling and digging the soil.
Right.
So basically, that's where we're at with the messianic times, and that's the problem with Christ bit anyway. Prayer books. So one of the significant things, I talked before the break about progressive Judaism, understanding the world and religion and Judaism as a developing tradition, as we understand more about our world and more about creation through science, through psychology, through history, through archaeology. Hopefully we're moving forward into a deeper understanding of humanity and the world. And not surprisingly, therefore, our prayer books change. The language changes as the world's understanding grows and as the world's situation changes. So, for example, we tend to have a new prayer book in every generation or two. And the previous prayer book we've been using until 5 years ago talked about napalm. In some of the creative readings, it had readings about napalm and sort of Vietnam era stuff.
Oh, okay.
Now, napalm is still a terrible, terrible weapon, but it isn't part of the new consciousness, part of our world today so much as it was then. And so some of the images just lost their intensity and their effectiveness, really. So we've produced a new prayer book, and I have it here. It's 702 pages, very heavy, heavy stuff. And I was the team leader for the editorial committee on this. And so, for example, it has an emphasis on environment, which in the last prayer book they weren't really aware of at all. There was no mention of environment. So the first thing is that we actually planted a stand of trees to acknowledge the carbon that was produced in producing a new book, the CO2 emissions. But then there are poems. There's a lovely midrashic quote, which is astonishing. It's from more than 1,000 years ago. It's about Adam. And it says, when Adam was created, God took him into the Garden of Eden and showed him all the trees and said, you've been put here to look after this wonderful expanse. And don't blow it, because if you do, there won't be anybody here after you to repair the damage.
Good heavens.
Which is quite chilling. It makes me...
isn't it?
It makes me goose-pimply just to say that, but from more than 1,000 years ago. So our tradition is really full of what we today would call sustainable awareness. And so one of the things I can show you in this prayer book, if you've got time for me to read one of the creative readings.
Yes, please do.
The way this prayer book works, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from here, but it's quite innovative. On the right-hand side, we have the traditional service, and you'll be able to see here that we've got it written in Hebrew, but also transliterated. So people whose Hebrew is not very good can still participate when we read Hebrew, but it's also translated because sometimes we read it in English. So that's the right-hand side. But on the opposite side, we have a creative reading on the same theme. So instead of necessarily doing the traditional service each time, we also bring in some creative readings. Now, the reason I've turned to this one is because it was written for Australia and South Africa. And it has our imagery. And see if you, I think it's pretty obvious, but I'll read it. My thoughts roam.
Just before you start to do that, because we're coming to end of time. So just quickly, that is, and it's probably very quickly, that is a massive undertaking.
Yes.
So when we get back, let's hear the poem and talk a bit more about this. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Jonathan Keren-Black. He's a rabbi at the Leo Baeck Centre in East Kew, and I just cut him off badly before the break, and he's about to read us a piece out of this newly put together prayer book. Thanks, Jonathan.
So the interesting thing is that these prayers, a lot of these prayers can be used by all sorts of denominations. They're not specifically Jewish. And soon after this book was published, I went along to somebody's funeral, and sure, they were reading something that sounded familiar, and I found it was one of the readings before the mourner's prayer from our prayer book that just been published. So, Christian funeral, I should say.
Yeah.
So this poem is the one that's got this sort of Australian feel. My thoughts roam. I must seek out a mountain and stand on its peak, the clouds swirling below me, spread out over the magnificence of your creation. But I've still not reached you. A flock of rosellas with feathers of ruby and emerald soar free, their wingtips touching heaven. You are close, I can feel you in the blue of the sky, in the path of the river below me, that threads its way marked by stands of eucalypt, but I have not succeeded. Your presence eludes me. But I do not fall. I find you in the gentle wind. The soft touch of your voice whispers to me. It is so small, so gentle that I can scarcely hear it. But I do not just hear it, I feel it. What a challenge to feel your voice. And now I float gently down, the wind carrying me in a cradle of song. And I hear your voice as it whispers to my soul. For the soul that you have given me is pure.
That's beautiful. And that was written by, do we know the author, or is it?
Yes, it was written by somebody in Melbourne, actually.
So it's local work, and you've gathered that all together with traditional and upgrading of gender, etc., and issues which are no longer topical, bringing it up to date.
Yes.
How long did that take?
Oh, this is a big undertaking. I think it took about a year and a half for the editorial committee working on this, and I worked many nights through the night, till 3 a.m. So, and it's been in use for 5 years. So I've recovered, and we're just about to start on the new one.
Good heavens!
Not for the same. This is for the Sabbath and weekdays, and now I'm starting to work on the New Year, the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur book.
That's very impressive, because I'm familiar with some Christian prayer books and hymn books for that matter, and they are ancient. There's been no attempt to upgrade them, let me tell you. And a poem like that is so topical and so current, you don't feel as though you're locked in the Stone Age somewhere. It's amazing. Now, you've got in addition to this activity, you've had a long ongoing interest in ecological matters. I believe you like, for example, your own home is a bit of a showpiece, isn't it, as far as ecology is concerned?
Yes, I should have told you it's not my home anymore. We've just sold it, actually.
Oh, okay, right.
But
your former home.
We built it in 2006.
Yes.
As an environmental house in Camberwell. And we actually used it for the Jewish Ecological Coalition as a show house, and we would take tours around it every few months. So I've taken many people around, and I hope I've had some influence. Actually, I know I have had some influence on people who were planning to build their own houses, and could see things and draw them to the attention of their own architects and energy engineers. A very, very efficient house, actually. One of the advantages of that house was it was pre-designed. It was one of 12. It's worth saying it was one house on Turak Road with a paddock behind it, and it was turned into 12 houses. So you can that in itself, people don't realise that's very environmentally friendly to start with, because it means you're housing many more people, many more families in the same space, who can be near to city and town and don't have to have these spreading suburbs like we've got around Melbourne.
Absolutely.
But aside from that, the other 11 houses were built conventionally, and ours was built with this very high environmental spec. So it enabled us to compare the performance. And ours used a quarter of the energy of the other houses on average.
Good heavens.
And 1/10 of the mains water.
And that's using technology from then. It's advanced to now. So you probably could do better.
Well, I think if we sought to do that, in general, we'd be doing pretty well, wouldn't we?
We certainly, well, in general, I don't mean to diminish the achievement there, but the technological.
I think actually you wouldn't be seeking to do better so much as make it more affordable, because we put a premium. We said we would spend 10% more in achieving that, and when you're building a house, that's quite a big chunk of money.
Yes,
so I would say that we would seek to reduce that gap, and you could probably do that for 3 or 4% more now, and that's what you do.
That's very, very encouraging, and that sort of rolls over. So you can stand at, say, in the interfaith context, and you can stand there as this progressive rabbi and say, well, I have personally achieved this. How much activity is there in the interfaith movement as far as ecology is concerned, environment?
Well, not as much as there should be, I would say. We have the Jewish Ecological Coalition in the Jewish community, and it's been going since 2003, but it doesn't have a lot of traction. We've had a few festivals, and it's, as I say, it's still going, but I would say that it's probably only engaged a few hundred people, really, effectively, and that's not enough out of a community of 100,000 in Australia. And more broadly, in interfaith, we have an organisation called Green Faith ARC, and ARC stands for the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, and that's having quite a lot of influence in that we've done lobbies to Canberra and Parliament, very, very effective lobbies, I think. We had 3 days of meeting with parliamentarians and advisors and senators last year. And we also, when we went up to Brisbane, and we had quite a significant influence, a lot of interviews about the need to divest and move money out of carbon investment and out of mining. So that's having significant influence. I would still say it's not engaging enough people on ground. If anybody wants to join, look up arrcc.org.au and please sign up.
Now we need to divest ourselves because we're out of time, and I am hoping that you'll come back next week because there's more to talk about.
Oh, surely there is. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. We'll be back next week, and we'll be speaking again with Jonathan Keren-Black about the environmental issues. Thanks for watching.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allah.